In a year packed with many African elections, Nigeria, the continent's largest economy and most populous country, will head to the polls on 25 February to elect its president. The contest has been widely dubbed a three-horse race between the candidates of the two main political parties, Bola Tinubu of the ruling All Progressive Congress and Atiku Abubakar of the opposition People's Democratic Party, as well as the Labour Party, Peter Obi. Given the internal and external challenges such as insecurity, corruption, high levels of unemployment, and a declining influence in international affairs that have characterized the Buhari era, the next administration will have to grapple with the uphill task of strengthening Nigerian democracy and enhancing the country's international stature. Good afternoon, colleagues and participants from South Africa, Nigeria, and other parts of Africa, and further afield. My name is Oluwaseun Teller, Head of the Future of Diplomacy at the University of Johannesburg Institute for the Future of Knowledge. On behalf of the Institute and the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation, I would like to welcome you to this important and timely event. I would like to express my gratitude to the Director of the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, Professor Muntambara, and my colleagues at the Institute, Dr. Kasiboni and Tandi, for their support towards the success of this event. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Akinola at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation for this great collaboration. In a 2002 survey by Afrobarometer, almost 89% of its citizens opined that Nigeria was heading in the wrong direction, and 77% were dissatisfied with the country's democracy. Some of the key challenges identified include poor management of the economy, high levels of unemployment, poverty, poor infrastructure, and high levels of crime and insecurity. Similarly, a November 2002 survey by the National Bureau of Statistics reveals that 133 million people, 63% of the country's population, are multidimensionally poor as a result of a lack of access to basic services such as healthcare and education. While Nigeria is sometimes dubbed the giant of Africa, these are clear signs of a crippled giant, to use the title of Professor Osagai's seminal book. Now, as an important exporter of democracy to other African countries, Nigeria's domestic performance is critical to its moral authority and its capacity to deploy its non-entrepreneurship to promote democracy abroad. This is complicated by the fact that the resources that are critical to promote its foreign policy objectives, including democracy promotion, are increasingly being diverted to domestic imperatives in light of the country's pervasive insecurity and economic challenges. And of course, this has significantly undermined Nigeria's regional and global influence. Nevertheless, Abuja's fate is intrinsically linked to that of the African continent. Despite its challenges, the size of the Nigerian economy, population, and military, as well as the popularity and influence of its culture and additional power, dictate that the result of this presidential election will have a significant impact on Africa and further afield. And I'm glad that we have identified distinguished panelists to engage some of these critical issues. At this juncture, I would like to introduce the chair of today's event, Hidayat Azan, who is the director of the Center for Democracy and Development, an Abuja-based policy advocacy and research organization focusing on deepening democracy and development in West Africa. Hidayat Azan is a lawyer and has held fellowships in universities across Europe and the United States. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tella, and it's a pleasure to be here, and in particular to talk about the Nigerian elections, joined by an erudite team of the best that Nigeria can actually, that Nigeria boasts of. And so we would be treated to a very interesting and exciting conversation itself. And like as we've already heard, these elections are very important for us. It represents our 7 consecutive elections and will be like 24 years of unbroken democracy, the longest in all of Nigeria's 4 republics itself. It's also one that we have actually seen an expansive increase in the numbers of registered voters in the country, with young people spanning over 39% of the registered voters. Put together, young people and middle age represent like 70% on the voters registers list. And importantly, Nigerians have always yearned for a third force in these elections. We are having that third force that we've always yearned for, seeing the insurgent candidate Peter Obi of the Labour Party, of course, receiving lots of attention, in particular from the young Nigerians. And of course, Rabiu Musa Kwakwanso himself also being supported by young people from the northern part of the country, and one of the most populous vote bank in Nigeria, Kano State itself. But this election, so when you think of it, it's an opportunity for us to renegotiate Nigeria. But there are lots of important factors that will actually be determining these elections. And I think at the CDD, we have all of a sudden put this to be like what we call the 4 highs. And thankfully today, we are going to be discussing some of these 4 highs during this session. And of course, their identity, insecurity, information, and the role of institutions. And these are quite important when you look at it from the point of view that identity is actually playing a very large role in these elections. And by identity, we are talking in terms of ethnic identity, seeing that for the first time since the 1979 elections, you have candidates from the 3 major ethnic groups vying in these elections: Hausa, Fulani, Igbo, and Yoruba itself. And these politics of zoning itself between the North and the South. But generation is also quite important. When you look at the registered voters, people are now telling us like, we can't actually make the change, but we do know that youth are not monolithic in these elections. While importantly is the role religion is playing, with 3 of the top candidates being Muslim and 1 being a Christian. You go further, you speak about insecurity. In these elections, Nigeria is actually being faced by an epidemic of insecurity, blighting all the 6 geopolitical zones of the country, from the Boko Haram insurgency or Islamic State in West African province, banditry in the northwest of the country, separationist agitation, kidnapping, and all sundries, which will also affect the ability to conduct credible elections. In fact, access to poll will be a constant in these elections, and we all know what information actually means in this current electoral cycle. It goes beyond the integrity of information in elections, both online and offline, and having a very huge role to play. And I think the far inner point I'll latch on will then be the role of institutions in these elections. And the most important institutions, of course, is the election management body, which in the recent elections, in fact, going into these elections, Nigerians are having some confidence, like beyond what has been previously prevalent in the election management body, how they would actually conduct credible elections, manage situation, manage logistics, are important challenges, but they are not the only actors in these elections. The role the judiciary will play, the role security agencies will play, and the role other institutions, like you would have possibly heard about the denomination of Nigeria and the Naira scarcity, which we are currently being faced. No Nigerian would have actually thought that the CBN would be the decider or one of the decider of this current electoral cycle. But this is where we find ourselves, and this is another opportunity to renegotiate democracy for ourselves as a country. And I can tell you that in spite of all the challenges, either in Abuja, Lagos, in the nooks and crannies, people are still excited to go to the polls because elections are like festival of democracy for us here in the country. And joining us on the panel, of course, is we have people whom I know very well. They are like the best you can actually ask for. Professor Remi Ayede from the University of Ibadan himself. Professor Ayede has published extensively on elections. Of course, he was even a visiting scholar at the Electoral Institute of which belongs to the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria between 2016 and 2017. And that was immediately after the acclaimed 2015 elections of the country itself. He has been a research fellow at PASGA, former head of political science at the University of Ibadan. He himself has become a teacher of teachers as well. And his work, of course, spans public policy, especially social and security policy, administrative reform, and democratic institution building. We are also joined by Dr. Kayode Shola, who is also a research associate and a professor at the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies, University of Lagos. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Lagos and an alumnus of the Institute of American Politics and Political Thought, University of Massachusetts itself. Ishola's research and publication demonstrates that political thoughts, theories, idea, and behavior exist and can be explained through multiple sources, including but not limited to indigenous knowledge system and popular music. And he has won a lot of research grants based on this. And last but not the least, but also one of my mentors that I do look up to is Professor Igosa Osage himself, who is the current Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, our elite think tank. Even if we are the CDT currently, we compete with the NIIA himself. Professor Igosa Osage sits on the UN panel, UN Secretary General Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters, a member of the Board of Trustees of the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. And of course, he is well published. He has been a former Vice Chancellor. He is one of the 3 Nigerians that have been to Uppsala. They like to talk a lot about that. So you are welcome on board. And I think on that note, I'll turn to Professor Ayede to give us his opening address. Professor Ayede, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Hidayat, for that very generous introduction. I recognize the presence of my colleagues and also our friends from University of Johannesburg, Lagos. And so also special greetings to my teacher, Professor Igosa Osage, who is the current the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. I've been asked to talk about party politics, and I'll start by saying that if we want to look at the political parties fielding candidates in the current 2023 election, what we'll miss will be a lot if we don't look at the history of political parties in Nigeria, because Nigerian political parties have been very dynamic, and we have come a long way in terms of their nature and character, and how they have emerged as special institutions under this democratic dispensation. If you look through the history of political parties, you see there are certain fundamental challenges with these political parties. At independence, the political parties more or less behave as if they are agents of specific ethnic groups, and as such, the political parties were sort of dominated by leaders from particular ethnic groups. And it became a major problem because politics became something like warfare involving ethnic armies. And because of that, right through the period of military rule and other democratic constitution making, there have been efforts to redesign the character of political parties. And that has been done in a number of ways. The first is to make sure that we reduce the influence of ethnicity in politics, in the building of political parties. The second is also to ensure that political parties are not confined to specific regions. And we also made effort to ensure that the appeal of political parties cut across specific regions. So you can see that in the provisions of the Constitution and Electoral Act in terms of the composition of political parties, the electoral formula, which says that for any person to win a particular election, it's not expected to win just the majority vote, but also 25% in 2/3 of the states of the Federation. And I think other very important elements that we have done in terms of engineering to strengthen political parties has also been with the issue of financing political parties. At some point, the government was funding political parties, and before it thought it was not in a position to do so. And the parties are now left in the hands of their owners for funding. The other issue that came up with political parties is the proliferation of political parties. If you look at the figure of political parties since 1999, the first thing that will strike you is the increase in the number of political parties that we have fielded over the period. And you will be surprised that as we entered into the 2019 elections, we had 91 political parties contesting, fielding about 73 presidential candidates. And efforts were then made to cut them to size. And that is why with the registration of 72 political parties in 2020, we now have 18 political parties. And of course, given the nature of our electoral system, which is a majoritarian system, the simple first past the post system, according to the Vega, it often ends in a system where you have two political parties. And that is why if you look at the electoral systems since 1999, we have had more or less two dominant parties. But as Idayat has mentioned, right now we now have three horse race situation. And this is likely because of what has happened between 2019 and now. Perhaps one can even say as a result of what has happened between 2015, the build up to the 2015 election, and the current situation. Now, until the registration of political parties, we had a situation where only two dominant parties existed, the PDP and the APC, which was not originally APC. We have previously the PDP, and then we have the APP, or we have the ACN, struggling to be the second dominant party. And then, of course, we also had at some point the CPC, but they were consolidated into the APC in the build-up to the 2015 election as a result of one, the schism in the PDP, and then, of course, the merger with ACN, CPC, and a faction of APGA. So this is where we are. We have two dominant parties. If you look at the figures over time, even though one of the parties has experienced change in nomenclature over time. But currently, we have a third party that has gained some momentum, as Idayat has also mentioned, as a result of the emergence of Obi. And you cannot understand the emergence of Obi as the third force without looking at two critical issues concerning party politics. The first has to do with the post-June 12 political settlement among the elites, which created a situation where rotation of offices across between the North and South, or what we describe in the heat of the June 12 crisis as a power shift between the North and the South. and then, of course, the emergence of the seized geopolitical zone. So that political settlement arrangement worked for the political parties, even though the principle was not enshrined in the constitution of the political parties. It was generally accepted, and that is why in 1999, all parties, I mean the three major parties or existing parties at that time, fielded only candidates from the Southwest. The same occurred when Yar'Adua became president, but of course, there was a hiccup as a result of the death from illness of Yar'Adua. But the constitution required that the vice president would take up the position. And after a lot of debate and struggles, Jonathan became the acting president and then president. He contested the 2011 election with all of these debates, given the fact that he came from the minority in minority group, the Niger Delta, which has been struggling with militancy against the deprivation that occurred in that place. He easily got some kind of sympathy, and eventually he won the 2011 election with a very broad support from within the political party, the PDP itself, and also from among Nigerians generally. And then it was then replaced by Buhari of the APC, a party that emerged from the merger of the political parties that I've listed before, and the schism that happened in the PDP. And that's how we now have the consolidated two-party, the APC, and then, of course, the PDP. Because again, the APC won election in 2019, so such that we have the second term of the Buhari government. Now, there's the way the political parties have been organized was such that if we're still to maintain the arrangement, then the president is supposed to come from the south rather than the north. And that became a major issue within the political parties, especially when it came to the party primaries. Eventually, there was this debate within the PDP and the APC regarding what is to be done. But the Southern Governors Forum insisted that it is the turn of the South to produce the president after 8 years of Northern presidency. After a lot of struggle, of course, the North then conceded. But the issue was not settled until the primaries were done, because within the PDP, the only party that had rotation presidency written into its constitution, there was this challenge. And what we find out is that because the PDP, after losing election in 2019, was more or less left in the hand of the governor of Rivers State, who felt that he was very critical to the sustenance of the party. He felt that he had a right to go for the presidency. Although he's from the South-South, given the fact that Goodluck Jonathan has had a run on behalf of the South-South, people thought that it was not supposed to be given to the principal in the political party. That created a lot of people. And then the another strong contender within the party, Goodluck Jonathan, Abubakar Atiku, the former vice president, said if the presidency within the PDP was microzoned to the southeast, he was not going to contest. But if it was not microzoned to the southeast, he was going to give it a shot. He eventually did, because the APC cleverly, delayed their own primary to see what will happen within the PDP. So the primaries was hard fought, which unfortunately the governor of Rivers State did not win, because Tambuwal stepped down for Atiku at the last minute. That's how Atiku Abubakar, a northern candidate, emerged as the PDP presidency. But as that struggle was going on, Obi was also a contender within the PDP, saw the handwriting in the wall, and quickly defected from that party and relocated himself with the Labour Party. And the whole build-up around him is hinged on two important situations. The first is the fact that because some people have sympathy for the Southeast, since it is only the only zone within the South that has not occupied that seat, and also because a lot of young people were also fed up with the old horse, the PDP and the APC. They thought that they found an alternative, what Hassan Hidayat has described as the third force. And so you'll find that when many young people rally around the candidacy of Peter Obi of the Labour Party. So we have this generational interest milling around the Labour Party, and also the sympathy for the Southeast are also building up around the Labour Party. And I think that's actually what enabled both the Labour Party and then its candidate to gain traction in this party politics. Otherwise, in terms of experience, in terms of presence, in terms of resources, in terms of reach across the Nigerian geography, Obi would not be a match for either both Asiwaju or Atiku of the APC and the PDP respectively. So that's the reason why we have what has been described as a three-horse race rather than the traditional two-horse race that we have experienced since 1999. Now, if you then look at the parties themselves, you will find that in the build-up to the election, the campaigns, and so on and so forth, the primaries were so hard fought that the conflicts from those primaries spilled into the current situation with the political parties. In fact, the PDP has not been able to overcome the political crisis, the internal crisis that came out of the primaries. The same thing with the APC, because one of the major characteristics of the primaries was also this debate about whether they should respect the zoning principle or not. Within the PDP, Obi, of course, left, and then unfortunately for Wike, he couldn't stand the machine of Abubakar Atiku. And then, of course, that led into a major crisis in which he pitched tent with 4 or so other governors, and they became what is known in Nigerian politics as the G5, the governors who were opposed to the way and manner in northern candidates as emerged from within the PDP. And they then tried to extract some concession, from the candidate and also from the party to no avail. And then some of them eventually gave up and returned to the fold of the party, while the real leader of the G5, that's Governor Wike of Rivers State, has remained at the margins of the party. I think at the last count, he has recognized Asiwaju of the APC as the man with in fact, I use the word, the character that best fits the position of president. So, of course, Abubakar Atiku has carried on with his life. His campaign has been going on, and so on and so forth. Obi, of course, has pitched his tent with the Labour Party, and he has enjoyed a lot of followership in certain states, in the South, in the Middle Belt, that is the North Central, and also, of course, the Southeast, with pockets of support from him as a result of the revolt against the Muslim ticket of the APC. Now, in the case of the APC, the ruling party, the primaries was even more hard fought because there were claims that a lot of money had to change hands, because even the candidate who eventually emerged announced that he wasn't confident that the North was willing to give him the ticket. In fact, a day before the primaries or so in Abeokuta, there was a meltdown, when he went to visit the governor of Ogun State, where he made that famous Emilokan speech saying that he has worked hard for the political party. He was instrumental to the emergence of Buhari as the president of Nigeria, and he has worked so hard, he felt that it was his turn to be rewarded. And even throughout this campaign stage, he has insisted that it was actually payback time. And he was in fact suggesting that Atiku also should recognize that, because he supported him in the 2019 contest and so on and so forth. So within that party, there's this tension, or there were always all this claim within the APC that President Buhari has anointed the candidate. He himself said that he has a candidate that he will not announce it because the candidate's life will be endangered. But people waited to no avail, because eventually there was no candidate anointed, even though within the political party themselves, especially associated with the chairman of the party, there were claims that Lawan, the current Senate president, was actually the anointed candidate. Well, but it was never to be, because eventually when the curtains went down to the primaries, it was Asiwaju that became the candidate. He immediately tried to, sue for reconciliation and so on and so forth. But it seems that those who are offended by the emergence or his emergence will not let him get a good night's sleep. And that's why he's been announcing very clearly that he has not enjoyed broad support from his political party. And this is very strange, because first, he had a very good outing at the primaries, scoring about 1,717 votes or so out of the 2,100 votes that was available during the primary. I would have thought that with such good outing at the primaries, he would find it easy to forge ahead. But even the appointment of his deputy, his vice president, candidate, was a big issue. And he eventually ended up with a Muslim ticket, which has generated another kind of reaction from both within the party and outside the party. And as we speak now, there's no clear evidence that he has been able to close ranks within the APC. Indeed, when he went to Abuja again recently, he has also claimed that some of the crises that has occurred within the Nigerian society and environment have been precipitated to undermine his candidacy. Specifically, was referring to the fuel scarcity and then the crisis that has followed the redesigning of the Naira note. So we find ourselves in a situation where you have a candidate that won with a landslide at the party primaries, but didn't quite seem to have that landslide support from within the party. In fact, the situation is particularly made more complicated when the president himself came out to say that he really doesn't care what party wins the election or what candidates emerge as president-elect, because as far as he's concerned, his own legacy is to have a legacy of free and fair election to show to Nigerians that his party respects the wish of Nigerians. This is clearly very strange, given the fact that in Nigeria, you don't stand for election as an independent candidate. You have to be put forward, nominated by a political party. Now, for a president to say that, make those kind of statements, give some strength. Yes. Okay. That's just the general picture I'm trying to paint about the political parties and the dynamics that have gone on. It's only within the Labour Party that we don't have the kind of contention that we find within the other three major parties. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aide, for the overview. He has given us a paper on Nigeria's party politics as it currently stands, and they are all indicative and important issues, really, as this three-way us, the constitutional provision itself, the way it is framed in such a way that you have to win the highest number of votes, 25% spread across 2/3 of the federation, which is 24 states, and the FCT as written in the Constitution. And the fact that for this is a very close elections with the likelihood of runoff being projected. Runoff in Nigeria does not end on the first call. its hands on like 3 different sets, and even who gets to run is very difficult to determine. So it's not about the person who first gets the highest number, but not the second person, but the person who actually got the most spread will be the one to be on the ballot. These are issues we are trying to grapple with, and these are issues we've not experienced. We've never gone into a runoff in the history of the country, and in a very ethnic, identity-charged contest. I think this will be very important, and that is why on this note, we will bring in Dr. Kayode Ishola to speak about the impact of ethnicity and religion on the 2023 presidential elections. Dr. Ishola, you have just 10 minutes for now, so we can take enough questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I was written to say I had 15 minutes, but 10 minutes, I will try to fit into this, especially because some of the things I will give as background, Prof has already helped me to give it. Now, generally, when I look at the 2023 election, what I see is what Fela calls coffin for the heads of states. I see a black coffin, wooded with ethnicity, framed with religion, and nailed together by everything but what is critical to the nation. And interestingly, this coffin was posted to us after colonialism, and was finally deposited in the government house of Nigeria in 1979. So whoever ultimately becomes the president of Nigeria after the elections next 2 weeks will fit into this coffin and may still not be able to perform primarily. We all know that ethnicity and religion have been characteristic of Nigerian political system since 1960 and up to now. The 2 dominant political parties, apart from the NCNC, came from ethno-religious organizations. I don't want to go into details again. You remember how MPC emerged and how Action Group emerged. So ever since that time, we've been having these interactions between the Nigerian political system on one hand, and then the scourge of ethnicity and religion on the other hand. And it has been between North, South, Christian, Muslim, ever since. That has been the dichotomy. In fact, it has created several lexical innovations in our political environment. So we now talk about same faith tickets, zoning, geopolitical balancing, and all that, owing to how we have, so far interacted with ethnicity. And if you look at the current political parties and the candidates that are now going for the election, you have a Muslim ticket, Southwest, Northeast ticket, Christian, Muslim, Southeast, Northwest ticket. And then for the Labour Party, you have a Muslim, Christian, Northeast, South ticket. And those are the things that you see, Now, from whichever definition we want to approach them, ethnicity and religion have certain characteristics. One is egoism. Both of them are egoistic. The other one is discrimination. They discriminate. Competition in another one, unhealthy one for that matter. Now, religion has one extra one, that is intolerance of alternatives or oppositions. Now, if these are characteristic of ethnicity and religion, it goes to say, therefore, that the Nigerian political environment that is built upon these 2 issues will be full of contradictions that are similar to this. So that is why you have nepotism, corruption, discrimination, marginalization, strategic exclusion, clannishness, and favoritism all around. And with all this, suspicion raised in the system every day. There is threat, there is anxiety, and there is fear in everything and almost everywhere. And of course, this is what Fela Anikulapo Kuti was talking about in the Coffin for the Heads of State. I quote some of the lyrics. It says, I waka many places everywhere in Africa. Okay, north and south, they have their policy. One Muslim and the other one Christian. And therefore, everywhere the Northerns reign or the Christians reign, you have a Christian in the key position, in each of the key positions of the state. And everywhere you have Muslims reign, you also have Muslims in the key positions of the state. That's exactly what Fela's album, Coffin for the Head of State, is trying to talk about. So if we take a look, a sample look at the 14 of those who have controlled the affairs of Nigeria since 1960 to now, what you have, we give you 8 Muslims, 9 Northerners, 2 Southwestern Christians, and then 1 South-South Christian. Of course, the skewness doesn't need the wisdom of Orunmila to be identified. Now, this flows into all ministerial and administrative appointment positions in the country, the critical institutions such as the security agencies and everything. What you see is the correlation of the figures that I've given you above. So nepotism, corruption, discrimination, marginalization, strategic exclusion, clannishness, favoritism definitely reign in the Nigerian political system. And of course, as I said, they will always raise suspicion, and of course, they will not create peace in the political system. So, as we stand now, and as we move towards the 2023 election, it is this same coffin of contradictions that the candidates are going to walk into. You know, Fela produced the album Coffin for the Head of State after the Calcutta attack of 1977 or 78, I beg your pardon. The state had repressed the Calcutta, killed Fela's mother, and then Fela took a coffin in protest to the Nigerian government house at Dodabara, deposited it there. And according to him, it is there now, it is still there. I think I have a picture of that coffin being there, and this is what our political office holders are now walking into. Now, rounding off, ethnicity and religion are the roots of Nigeria's crisis of nationhood. The national question in Nigeria is tied to them. Identity question in Nigeria is tied to them. Citizenship question is tied to them. Citizen-settler dichotomy in Nigeria is tied to them. All these that I've mentioned are tied to ethnicity and religion. And unfortunately for us, they are the fundamental issues a state has to resolve or address first before even thinking of democracy as a system of government, let alone election as our host called it, a celebration or festival of democracy. The civil society question is also there. Without a civil society, the state becomes all these are still tied to ethnicity and religion. So what you now have is that the political parties in Nigeria do not have manifestos that are built on ideology. Instead, the only consideration they give to, choice of candidates who will represent them is North-South, which represent ethnicity, or Christian-Muslim, which represents religion. And I gave you the picture in what follows. But previous Nigerian governments have attempted to address this problem through the formation of 3 institutions, in my view. You have the National Orientation Agency. The duty is to just let us know that we are one. We are one. There's no Igbo, there's no Yoruba, there's no Muslim, Christian. And then you have the Federal Character Commission, which is expected to stand as a balancer into appointment into offices and institutions in Nigeria. And of course, you have the National Complaint Commission, which is supposed to do something similar to that. I feel that ordinarily, with the presence of these three organizations or these social institutions, ethnicity and religion shouldn't have been a problem in Nigeria. But alas, they have been quite inactive. But if I ask anybody here now to tell me about any of these institutions, you probably will not know as much of them as you will know of INEC or the judiciary. So they've been inactive because the issues they are supposed to address are never in the main agenda of the political parties. But they are the key issues. Political parties are busy talking about ethnicity and religion, but these agents cannot operate successfully because the issues they are supposed to be moderating are not even in the front burners of the political party. So what do we do? Because I have 10 minutes. I think what to do under this circumstance is make legislation to curb the damaging effect of ethnicity and religion in Nigeria. Creating these three institutions, in my view, are not enough. There must be strong legislation that will control the damaging effects of ethnicity and religion in Nigeria. Where you come from shouldn't matter. And I think UK has successfully done that in recent years. Nobody knows your origin. I am American, Briton. We must also fashion out a legislation that will make people feel they are Nigerian. So when you obtain your UTME form, or you want to sit WAEC, or you want to join anything, don't mention your background. You are a Nigerian, and once you have a card, you are eligible to that post. If we make a law to that effect, it is going to help us correct this. Now, religion too, there is need for a legislation that will relegate. No, I don't want to use the word relegate, but I will put religion to where it belongs, private domain. When you eliminate religion from the public sphere, you create those negative things that religion brings to the public. You remember the experience of the United States? Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of any religion. And that is the very first amendment to the Constitution of the United States because of the contradiction that was created. I mean, never again should a country like Nigeria spend taxpayers' money to send people to Mecca or Jerusalem. So, two things in summary: create legislation that will eliminate promotion of ethnicity, and then create another legislation that will put religion in its private place. You are a Christian, you are a Muslim, it's your cup of tea. Don't bring them to the public anymore. And so once these are done, I think we are going to overcome the problem. Finally, and I think I'm still within my 10 minutes, my proposition is not for now, it is for the future. As we stand today, we are going back into that coffin that prevented many presidents in the past from performing what they promised to perform, even with the best of intention. That coffin is the current Nigerian structure. That coffin is the dominance of ethnicity and religion that have overshadowed critical national questions that must be addressed before you put people in office, that have overshadowed the critical national questions that will form the manifesto of the political parties. People in most cases mistake manifestos for programs. When a party comes and says, I'm going to give you 3 meals per day, I'm going to bring you electricity, these are programs. None of the political parties in Nigeria has a manifesto in terms of what it means technically, because manifesto must come from ideology, which will now dictate all this. So as we are now, we can only hope for the best. Maybe we're expecting miracles, but I assure you those miracles will never happen. Whoever becomes the president come 10 days after now, we still walk into that coffin and will not be able to perform everything or anything that he wants to perform because of the presence of ethnicity and religion in the Nigerian political system. I thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to stop at this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishola. We wouldn't expect lesser from you, since we can see Fela's picture right in the background, right behind you. Yeah. And we started with coughing for head of state and coughing after, but it's thanks for the thoughtful thoughts. I think it's really germane. The lack of national identity continues to be a challenge that is blighting Nigeria's ability to really evolve as that nation. But I hope Professor Ihosa will not start speaking about nation state as part of what his thoughts really are and citizenship. But I please, if you can reflect like 2 minutes on that, since he is an expert really around that area as well, while he speaks to us today about the 2023 presidential elections and Nigeria's external relations, which are quite very important to us as a country. Thank you, and as a continent as well. Thank you very much, Professor Sage. You have the floor, please.
Yes, I say thank you, Madam Chair and Moderator, and thanks very much to the organizers of this very important event. I have been asked to talk about Nigeria's external relations. I will do so, but the chair has asked me to spare 1 minute to respond to the professor's very beautiful thesis on identity politics as they relate to ethnicity and religion. The point about ethnicity and religion really is that if the Greeks were the masters of governance today, they would say these are public realm exceptions. They actually belong to the private realm. What you profess as a religion, it's entirely up to you. It's like the name you choose to bear. The identity, that you have is also yours. It's voluntary. I have just come from an event where people who have been representing particular parts of the state where I live now are not indigenous of the state. So these are matters of construction and social construction and reconstruction. So legislation can help, but legislation would work effectively if and when the subjects themselves, in this case, those who choose to be religion 1 or religion 2, or who choose to be ethnic group 1 or ethnic group 2, themselves are prepared for the harmony of living together. So there is a political culture thing. In most diverse societies, the people first learn to live together. Legislation has a way of effectuating and furthering divisions where people have not even emphasized them. But that's up for debate. It's there. So it's not simply about legislation. It's also about how people cohabit, how they live, and what they make of the complementarities of life. There is nobody that does not need any person else. So these are part and parcel of the normal dynamics of society and social formations. But let me dwell on what I've been asked to talk about, Nigeria's external relations. The first thing is to say that from the point of view of the political parties and the candidates that are running for office in this election, we've not heard so much about foreign policy or about international engagements, other than the ones that they have been forced to address. So if you were looking for an organic articulation of positions on foreign policy, positions on international affairs and engagements, you are not likely to find a lot, coming from the parties and the candidates. And I think, we can explain this, and then I will talk a little bit about what we can expect from them, from the kinds of attitudes that we have seen. The first is that when you hear Labour Party, for instance, you're likely to think, of a party that has an ideological inclination. Labour is socialist, it's, even communist, it's, radical, it's revolutionary, and so on. The Labour Party that we have is not any of these at all. I mean, it's just another electoral platform. And as I'm sure Professor Ayede has already laid the foundation for our understanding, all the three parties are similar to what, under General Sani Abacha, Bola described as the five fingers of a leprous hand. They all are, etymologically, they all have the same roots, and they just have different names. So in the morning, somebody can be in one party and be in the second by afternoon and be in the third party by evening. So this Labour Party is not that kind of Labour. The APC at some point had some progressive agenda and had an inclination that made it a little to the left. But, because, candidates and members of the party have also crisscrossed the grounds from PDP and so on, it's difficult to tell. So you will still find, a number of them who like to profess some ideological inclinations that suggest, that they are a little to the left, but, that is something that has to be proven. The PDP is a liberal party, it's conservative. And that, some would say it has no ideological coloration, but it's the kind of party that easily fits into the conservative, mode, the liberal party and so on. It's laissez-faire, it's capitalist, it's free market, those kinds of things are common with the PDP. Now, if these things were to define, the kinds of external inclinations that the candidates and the parties would have, then I think the PDP would be the easiest to identify in terms of those externalities. You can easily say, well, it's a conservative party and the presidential candidate has been talking about privatization. He's been talking about outsourcing. He's been talking about foreign direct investment. He's been saying all of these things. But as you look closely, you will find that all of the other candidates are saying the same things. And where are they saying the same things? They're not saying the same things at the NIA. They're saying the same things at Chatham House, which actually is a new dimension of not just Nigerian, but Africa-wide, international engagements. You would find that over the last decade and more, African affairs are debated, if they are, but they are discussed. And, these meetings take place outside Africa. If it's not Davos, it's Paris, or it's Lisbon, or it's London, or it's Washington. And when these meetings are held, Africans who are the primary people involved in their own affairs are invited. Just as we found in the last Biden meeting, some people don't qualify to attend those meetings, even though you're going to talk about Africa and Africa's future. So, these externalities, the fact that the African matters are discussed far away from Africa itself, and that not all Africans are allowed to take part in these discussions, tells you something. Now, so ideally, we should have a crop of leaders in Africa who at least will be willing and able to engage this kind of, reality and seek reversals, so that you can bring Africa back to Africa, so that we can have this. We haven't heard so much about that from the candidates and the political parties in the presidential election in Nigeria, meaning that they would accept to go along with what the global polity has defined for Africa, that Africa is at the margins, and that in those margins you are to be led. When you have, the kinds of conflagrations such as, were found in Ukraine, you have very little scope and space for determining how exactly you will behave. You are expected to follow one side or the other. But, if you listen to discerning African leaders, such as the president of South Africa and, the president of Ghana, there is an attempt at least to say you should at least respect our positions as Africans. If it is not non-aligned, then let us, be able to determine what our options are and make our choices. Now, what all of these things portend is simply that we are going to have a continuation of what you might call the well-known contours of Nigeria's foreign policy and international engagements. So the paths are well defined by what we've been doing. They are not likely to be radical departures. First, it's an accepted, pillar of foreign policy that Africa is the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. My predecessor in office at the NI has also talked about concentric circles, about how Nigeria's external relations are defined by the geopolitics of our location. So Nigeria does not like to say Nigeria first, but Nigeria first, in that concentric circle. Then there are the neighbors and our sub-region of West Africa, and then Africa, and then the global South, and then the global community. Now, so Nigeria has, very strong commitments to multilateralism as the platform for global governance and for global responsibility, as well as global accountability. Nigeria believes very strongly in the agencies and departments of the United Nations system. Nigeria believes very strongly in the efficacy of the African Union. Nigeria believes in ECOWAS, and Nigeria believes that through these regional organizations and the international organizations, we can have a world that is shared. Then Nigeria believes, along with the rest of Africa, that Africa needs a greater voice, in these multilateral platforms, and that is where the strength will lie in. But Nigeria has also most recently gone into the whole circle of two things. First is that, the domestic matters of Nigeria are no longer truly domestic. Terrorism has become a critical part of the Nigerian landscape, banditry, violence, and radicalization, violent extremism. All of these things have, strong connections with the global community. Drugs are here. We have illicit drugs. We have, movements of light weapons, small weapons, and light arms. We have, our borders are porous. We have people entering the country from, several parts of the world. We have money laundering that is going on all around the place. There's cyber, the cyber space is insecure. What is clear is that, the broadening of these spaces of insecurity has made Nigeria a critical actor in the global togetherness, because these are not issues that Nigeria can address in isolation. Nigeria has to work with, the rest of Africa, has to work with countries in West Africa, such as we have found in the multinational joint force, in Boko Haram territory and so on. Nigeria has to work with the EU. Nigeria has to work with the AU and so on. There are conflicts in Africa that have been neglected by the rest of the world. Know that these days we insist on African solutions to African problems. The case of Ethiopia is one of the most recent ones, and Nigeria has put all of its efforts behind the initiatives through the AU and its various bodies, and it is not for nothing that the eminent persons group that the AU appointed, the Council of Elders, was led by Nigeria's former president, Olusegun Obasanjo. So this is the reality. This is the way to define Nigeria's foreign policy engagements and its external relations that I think the incoming government, whether it is Labour, or it is APC, or it is PDP, is likely to just inherit and go on with. But just to close, I know that Nigeria's foreign policy is undergoing review at this time. if there are things that can be done, the constituencies and the stakeholders are going through all of these things. But I think that Nigeria's resolve, is based on the fact that Nigeria can only be strong when Africa is strong. Nigeria can be developed when Africa is developed. And this has been, key to all of our foreign policy engagements, going back to the days of liberation struggles, going back to the days of the African Development Bank. Many people forget that Nigeria had a trust fund in the African Development Bank from which many countries on the continent could draw, credit. People also should be reminded that Nigeria had a technical aid program that allowed us to, in the manner of the Peace Corps that the United States had in the days of the Cold War, Nigerian, technocrats and professionals have gone to several African countries, to offer technical assistance, especially in areas of teaching, in the area of medicine, the area of law, and so on. So Nigeria is Africa written large, and that is why this election, especially the presidential election, is of great interest to the rest of the continent. It's of great interest to the West African region. I've been speaking with, the African diplomatic community within Africa and outside, and what is clear is that everyone hopes for the best. They keep reminding us that it was Nelson Mandela that said, if Nigeria gets it right, that is the day Africa emerges as a great force. So we hope that even with the not clearly defined, terrain of Nigeria's external relations, even if, the candidates and the parties are able to march on along these lines and assert themselves increasingly in the direction of an African voice that is increased through a permanent representation in the United Nations to strengthen multilateralism. The one that will have what at the NIA we identified long ago as the concert of medium powers, the kind of thing that BRICS represents today, and the putative MINT means. Those kinds of, so medium power, bodies, these ones can begin to redefine what is evolving as a new international order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sagi. It's Nigeria's domestic problem is no longer domestic. And of course, when Nigeria gets it right, Africa gets it right. So these are all, of course, we are looking forward to this. We will go on and take questions and answers. We already have lots of questions here. And we expect people to indicate with their hands up if they want to ask these questions itself. They will be unmuted and they can actually speak, while, of course, we continue to take questions and answers using the chat functions or question and answers here. So the first question is really from Victoria, and it's basically saying that why can't Africa adopt a quality discriminating electoral system like it was done in developed world before the 50s, when only people with prescribed education, qualification, or taxpayers are allowed to vote? I think I'll allow everybody to actually answer that question. Then the second question is for Professor Sagi, which is, can Professor Sagi from Kofi, can Professor Sagi please tease out Nigeria's relationship with Russia, China, and the BRICS? So that's our second question, and we are waiting to get more questions. Thank you. So who goes first? Professor Ayede, you have the floor.
Yes, let me say that with regard to BRICS, we have to go back to the foundations of the non-aligned movement. At the time, there were questions about whether non-alignment would mean neutrality or would mean that we don't take action at all by refusing to join any of the superpower blocs that we had in the days of the Cold War. But after the Cold War, it became necessary to reenact, a position for the Global South that would say, we want to carve out our own trajectory, leave us, to determine what we want for ourselves and where we get them from. will be determined by us. We don't want to be led by the nose, to accept any of those things. So BRICS, is one of the manifestations, one of the concrete representations of what Professor Bolaji Akinyemi that long ago called the concert of medium powers. BRICS is taking the place that says, while we are all for multilateralism, we also would want to have international organizations and platforms that we own and that we can use the way we deem fit. So that BRICS is able now to get credit and so on. All of these things are within the ambit of the notion of a concert of medium powers. Nigeria right now is actually working hard together with other BRICS members. And, who knows, if these things work well, Nigeria might become a member of the BRICS. But Nigeria has always been strong on the support for the concert of medium powers. Now, with regards to China, China is the new elephant in the room in Africa. Remember that China provides an alternative, to Western aid and Western support and Western forms of, if you like, benevolence, if not imperialism or neo-imperialism. But the point is that China has come to address the kinds of issues that the West was not, able to address. Questions of infrastructure, questions of, but especially roads, hospitals, airports, and so on. And China is strong on that. Now, today, when those who are jostled into the options that Africans are embracing are saying, oh, well, Chinese support or imperialism is worse than ours because China doesn't reckon with human rights. China doesn't reckon with accountability. There's a lot of corruption. The things are opaque. They're not transparent and so on. They've led to debates about the makeup of, the kinds of deals that we also had in the name of, loans and those credit facilities and those forms of support. Now, China provides a very useful option, for Africa. And that's the way it is to be seen. But, just like the BRICS trajectory insists, it is for Nigeria or Ghana, as Kofi would accept. It's for Nigeria or Ghana to choose its onions, to choose its friends, to choose, so it's a whole basket. All of these things coming from China reminded that China is not acting only as government front. There are a lot of Chinese, private sector companies that are in Africa today, and many of the things they just have government backing, but they are private initiatives. So I think that see what China has done. They have the FOCAC. They meet with African heads of states every year. They have the BRICS and bridges and roads, and now the West is responding because suddenly African infrastructure has also, gained traction, and people are talking about, the need for the West to become more focused on that. The West has also not addressed issues of climate change. If China begins to, angle on that, it becomes a big issue. But most of all, Chinese resonance in Africa is historically located. China has always had, a history of historical engagements that would make China closer to the kinds of realities we have had in Africa and in Nigeria. But anyway, the simple answer to your question is that China is in Nigeria, America is in Nigeria, everyone is in Nigeria. Nigeria has a choice to make when it comes to its true interests. Finally, Russia. You will see that what we have been looking for is to see if we can get an African position on Russia. The way things have come, especially in the light of the war in Ukraine, the West has come saying you must support us, you must align with us, and they've been going around the big capitals in Africa. They've come to Nigeria, they've been to Pretoria, they've been to Accra, they've been to Nairobi. Whether as Chancellor of Germany or as Foreign Affairs Minister of Sweden, or these guys are here. Russia, has meant many things to Africa. For us in Nigeria, when our civil war came, and for reasons of, those kinds of reasons that also stopped America from supporting us full force in the fight against Boko Haram terrorism, when the civil war came, and the West was unwilling to give us, as Nigerian government, the weapons that we needed to prosecute that war, Russia came in. Before then, even Russian scholarships were rejected by Nigeria. So Russia now has come into Nigeria, and in the face of this war, Nigeria has said what we want is a shared solution. It's one that the United Nations will play an active part in, and we want to see that this is resolved through peaceful means. This is increasingly becoming the African position, that it is possible to have a peaceful resolution. South Africa has even, volunteered to say, if you want us to mediate, we will mediate. So it's a time when Africa is no longer on the margins of saying, should we support A or B? We also want to come between A and B and say, look, we can help you resolve this crisis. And that's why we insist on that. Now, see what the African position has been, when we have had to vote in the UN. First time, a few African countries supported the UN motion condemning the invasion, which should be condemned because all small countries then become vulnerable, to the bullying of big countries. But by the second time, when the issues had become a little clearer, for reasons, remember that when we had to evacuate our citizens from Ukraine, the whole racist basis of the international society again came to the fore. I mean, our citizens were discriminated against. They were not allowed to enjoy the same kinds of services that people from the rest of the world enjoyed. So these kinds of issues now show us very clearly that we cannot be blind to the kinds of positions that we adopt. And so increasingly, many African countries are, angling towards, abstaining from yes or no. So when you abstain, you are sending a strong message. The message is to say, let the multilateral platform work. And the United Nations Secretary General has deployed all of those diplomatic strategies, is working behind the scene to see how the UN can be used. Now, what has stood between the UN and the resolution of this matter is the almightiness, if you like to call it so, of the Security Council members. I mean, the failure to agree on even simple matters, of reciprocities and so on. Now, but we believe that as the world increasingly gets the worse for it, sanctions have not worked. Wheat is difficult to come by. There's an energy crisis, the costs of living all over the world. All of these things are having global repercussions. And even though we are the worst for it, it's affecting everyone. So we hope that, Nigeria is working along with the other countries of the world, especially the countries of Africa, to see that we can bring this war in Ukraine speedily to a close. So Nigeria is friends to Russia. Nigeria is friends to Ukraine. Nigeria is friends to China. Nigeria is friends to all of the other countries. As Africa chooses and says, this is what we want, that's where Nigeria would be.
Can I take Victor's question? I think you gave
it
to
please.
All right.
No, I gave it to everybody, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think what I see in Victor's question presupposes that democracy is not working in Nigeria. I mean, that is why he proposed an alternative of going back to the 50s in the West, when only people with certain qualities and qualifications were asked to vote. I think it was just raising a critical theoretical issue. Some of us have observed critically that what we call democracy in Nigeria today is a Coca-Cola democracy. It's black, It is inside the bottle. It has red cork, and all over the world, we are taking or drinking the same democracy. In my view, that cannot work. I emphasize that cannot work, and I do not see any part of Africa where that has worked. The whole idea of democracy is premised upon possessive individualism, in which case the individual who is voting has been able to gather enough consciousness to look at A, B, C, D and take critical, informed decision of his or her own enlightened self-interest. What we have in Nigeria, this liberal democracy of one man, one vote, is directly antithetical to that. And maybe if we had allowed our own democracy to be designed towards resolving our own socio-political peculiarities, which unfortunately includes this ethnicity and religion from our history, we probably would have had a better version of democracy, a nativized version or domesticated version that could address our own system more than this same color democracy that we copied hook, line, and sinker from other parts of the world and we are practicing every day. So in as much as I believe that democracy is a good system of government, the texture that we apply in the Nigerian political system is artificial, is antithetical to our socio-political peculiarities, and may not be promising us anything. And that is why every 4 years or 5 years, what happens is just the ritual of the ballot box. People come out, do jamboree, press fingers on paper, do election, and then only political leadership change. The political situation, the political system have not been changing in Nigeria and in Africa. So I think it's high time we started rethinking and reconstructing the idea of democracy as may be peculiar to Nigeria and African countries. That's my response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ishola. We'll take Professor Ayede.
Really, I think that going back to the 1950s is like taking us backwards because the limitation of the franchise in the 50s is not something that is recommended this day because it's actually reflecting the level of understanding and development of democracy or democratic practice at that time. In fact, until 1946, women were not allowed to vote. And if you go on, you will see that it is in the 60s, late 60s, that the Blacks were incorporated as citizens with the right to vote in the United States. So those periods were actually periods where the franchise has not been universalized and extended to adults of a certain age and qualification to be able to vote. If you recognize citizens and then you want them to participate within the decision-making process of society, at least at a minimum, if people meet that basic requirement of age as adults, responsible citizens who take decisions for their families, they are expected to have the franchise, the right to vote. But one very interesting findings from research, which I think also responds to this question, is the very fact that if you look at the voter turnout in Nigeria, you'll find that it's one of the lowest in the world. And research effort to explain voter turnout across the world shows that the more educated people are, the less they are likely to come out to vote. So that it's actually people who are less educated, those with primary education qualification, and some measure of some number of people with post-primary education, that actually go to vote on election day. So what I would recommend, rather than restricting the franchise or depriving people of their rights, is really that voter education should be intensified so that people can gain better understanding of how democracy works and what role they are supposed to play as citizens, not just in voting, but also beyond the voting process, so that we recognize the fact that election is just designed, to put people in public office. There's a lot of activities that go on after that, involving organizing participation, whether by demonstrating or joining civil society groups, advocacy groups, to make government more responsive and responsible. These are the things we should be talking about and we should focus on, so that we have more enlightened and active citizens who are able to hold government to account in the intervening period between elections.
Thank you very much, Professor Hayede. We have our third question, which is actually from Dorcas, and it goes to all the panelists. How has the NSAS movement influenced political development in Nigeria? Are we seeing a more united and resolute citizenry who will turn out in large numbers to vote for who can do the job? Or are their religious and ethnic alignments still dominant? Professor Hayede, you can start.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's a very instructive question because I think the NSAS movement has precipitated what we are seeing in the obedient movement in Nigeria today. First and foremost, it is important to note that if you look at the voters register, especially the continuous voters registered that has just been concluded, you'll find that the youths now dominate the voters list. I think they make up to, I think between 18 and 45, they make up of over 60%, of the voting population. And that's why the chairman of INEC has described this election as an election for the youth, assuming that they are going to vote in one direction, because I think, as Siddharth has said, we must recognize the fact that the youth are a heterogeneous group. But that tells you how important the NSAS experience has been for young adults. And this has reverberated in the level of political participation that we are likely to experience. But in terms of the impact on voter turnout, it's going to be a little bit difficult to reach any conclusion right now because we don't have records of the collection of PVCs yet, because you have to collect your PVC and actually go out on election day to vote before you can make that kind of an impact on voter turnout. But if the basis of voter turnout as I've explained before, it shows that the more educated, the less chances of people going out to vote. And we are looking at the NSAS movement. It's actually made up of, I think, the more educated youths in Nigeria rather than those at the lower rung. So it may not translate into a major change in the turnout of voters. Then secondly, you also see that we have issues around fuel shortages and the Naira designation crisis. So this, and then when you add that to the security problem that we have, it's difficult to see the NSAS movement translating into massive increase in voter turnout.
Dr. Ishola, so the question is about the impact of the NSAS itself, if it will actually drive turnout, or if and ensure that people vote based on issues, or if again people, in spite of the NSAS, people are still going to follow the lines of religious and ethnic sentiments in voting.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm a bit pessimistic, and I'm sincerely afraid that people are still likely to vote along ethnic and religious lines. As I said during my presentation, you saw the dominance of entitlement from candidates and even from ethnic groups and religious groups. Khan is speaking. He's talking about our religion is central to us. Ethnic organizations are speaking. They are saying that you are a bastard if you belong to this ethnic group and you vote for another ethnic group. And all these sentiments are dominant in the agenda of the actors, both the subjective actors and the gladiatorial actors. So this does not give me some form of confidence that things will change drastically. However, I use the word drastically on purpose. Things may change a bit because of the factor of the NSAS. NSAS was a spontaneous movement. And of course, the obesism that we have today, in my view, is more of another political party movement, I mean, a political movement than a political party. Because, like Prof said, you have a contradiction of ideology here. Obi is a capital, is a super capitalist. The Labour Party is a socialist party. There is no synergy there. But more than the ideology behind it, what we see in the Obiism these days is a movement. And if you look at the age bracket of those who are involved in the NSACs, you see a synergy with what you have amongst those who are involved in Obiism. So I think combined, the NSAS spirit and the Obi spirit, in my view, we stand as a balancing force for the Nigerian political elite and the electorate. But I don't see the sentiment of my tribe, my people, my idea going away from now. Unfortunately, even as I mentioned in my presentation, these issues of ethnicity and religion are central to most of the critical questions of the Nigerian state. But none of the political parties is talking about them. They are not in the conversation of the political parties at all. They are touching the periphery. I will increase minimum wage. I will give you 5 meals per day. I will fix electricity. These are not ideological issues. They are not foundational issues. It's only when you address issues that are critical and all these things will now dovetail from there. So we're no longer, as I said, as I rounded off, we expect miracle, but that miracle is not likely to come yet because the fundamental things have not been addressed by the political actors, by the political elite. And of course, it's a question of hegemony. It has not trickled down into the minds of the people as the real reason why they need to be engaged in politics. A bit of things may change because of the movement of Obiism. But fundamentally, I'm pessimistic that people will change from this primordial sentiment when it comes to voting. Thank you.
Professor Osage.
I think that, NSAS has done something to the youths in Nigeria. First, it opened the eyes of many youths, especially the urban-based youths, to what you might want to call self-determined participation. I mean, they've been at the margins, they've been excluded. Remember, movements like Youth Power to Run, the Youth Bill, the law that was enacted. All of these things, point to an assertiveness on the part of youths. Participation has become very key. And I think, we can find the very great mobilization in many urban centers for the candidate of the Labour Party as an indication of the lasting, if not the lingering effect of NSAS. The fact that what they call the paradigm shift in terms of the generational shift, it's about time. Younger people need to be given a voice. They themselves must be disappointed that they are that divided the way they are now, namely that there are as many youths as they are, who are members of the other parties. If youths found a house in one place only, they probably would have been more assertive, and the consequence would have been more. But their energies are rather dissipated now, and it's a pity that some of them have fallen prey to the kinds of divisions of identity that the professor has identified. Some of them are held captive by religious professions and by ethnic affiliations and regional affiliations. It's a pity, but I see that this is the beginning of greater youth assertiveness. It's all thanks to NSAS and how it has opened the eyes of the younger people that there's a lot that the country expects of them and that they can take the future in their hands.
Thank you very much. We will take Kenny. Has age any significance in deciding number leadership of a country? If so, who should enforce it? That's number one. Number two, if candidates were to go beyond the lines of the peripherals, why do they get witch-hunted by the powers that be in the country, and of what value is true democratic tenet thereof? I think that goes to all the panelists. If we can take it in like 2 minutes each, that would be very good.
Well, it seems that it's a very general question regarding age, because it's talking about the country. I assume that it's significantly, specifically about Nigeria. I would say that the Constitution provides age limits for the different offices, and one of the most recent significant development in Nigeria has been the Not Too Young to Run bill, which sought to bring down the age of qualification for some of those elective offices, which suggests that the idea is really that Nigerians would want to have much more younger people take up elective positions in the country. And I think that's what Professor Sagai was talking about when he made reference to a generational shift. There's been a debate around that for quite a while, but there are really no conclusions regarding that. But generally, we are concerned about the health and vitality of leadership. And we think that youth come with some measure of strength and vigor, which the older generation are unable to provide. And therefore, there's been, from our experiences of presidents who have taken ill, and then the cost to both their performance and then their cost to the country's resources. All of these are very important when we are looking at the age qualification of those who are in government. Interestingly, the Constitution or the electoral adult don't put a ceiling on the age for any political office. So the ceiling is for younger people. That's why it was very clear that the process is rigged against young adults. Hence, the movement, the Not Too Young to Run bill, which sought to reduce the age qualification. But in terms of candidates being witch-hunted by the powers that be in the country, I think that, the way politics is organized, money talks. And if you don't have money, you are not likely to be able to go far. And that's why when you look at the Not Too Young to Run bill, it has been enacted into law. It's now operational. But yet you can look at the statistics in terms of the number of young people contesting for public office. The change has not been very significant. What people have advised, or what the initiative that has gone on within civil society, is people trying to provide empowerment programs in terms of education, in terms of getting the young people prepared for those offices, getting them conversant with the challenges that they are likely to face, and then of course providing ways and means to support them to be effective and strong candidates. That's where we are in Nigeria. Otherwise, it's money politics, and then of course the legwork you need to do. It takes time, to put yourself in the public space, for people to know you, and then for you to be able to influence and make a difference.
Dr. Ishola, are you back? If no further response, I think I'll hand over to Dr. Akinola for his closing remarks. I think it's been a pleasure moderating this session. I've learned a lot myself, and the conversation of Nigeria keeps going on and on and on. But we do know that these elections are quite important for us, and Nigerians are taking it serious because finally they do know that votes do have consequences. And these elections represent an opportunity to actually renegotiate development for the country. Thank you very much. Dr. Akinola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And I will start by saying that in both advanced and developing democracy, while there are several tenets of democracy, you will all agree with me that periodic election is one of the most important indicators of democratization across board. And despite the shortcomings of Nigeria's democracy and the inability of the citizens to fully enjoy the dividends of democracy, periodic change of government since 1999 has been one of the most important hallmarks of democratic development in the country. Indeed, the election will hold amidst the economic hostility, the social alienation, and fearsome insecurity that have characterized the socio-political space in the last years. Nigerians have been transformed from political apathy into self-determined participants, as one of the speakers actually highlights, with large numbers of voters registration with 3 leading candidates from 3 major ethnic groups in Nigeria. My name is Oye Akinola, and without actually representing, I will just give the highlights of the meeting. One thing that is exceedingly clear with the discussion in the panel is that the panelists are able to carefully and cleverly present the intrinsic nature and character of the forthcoming elections. They are also able to reiterate the importance of the Constitution to produce national-based political parties. They have also been able to explore the influence of the 1993 electoral processes on party nominations with ethnic and religious sensitivities, including the emergence of the 3-horse race, instead of the conventional 2-horse race that had characterized the Nigerian electoral system since 1999. The meeting also linked the electoral environment with the presentation of a coffin which impedes the performances of successive Nigerian presidency. The meeting reveals the 2 distinctive characteristics of ethnic and religious cleavages that have stiffened the political space and created coercive political system in the country. And one of the recommendations is just that the government should create legislation to eliminate ethnicity and make religion a private affair. From the foreign policy angle, one thing that we have also learned from the meeting is that foreign policy has been exceedingly relegated and ignored during the campaigns. And the parties, talking about the 3 political parties, have relatively the same background, just spread into 3 names, without any publicly declared ideological inclinations, though we may begin to understand or insinuate the nature of their foreign policies based on their pronouncement during campaigns and the antecedents. And the meeting also reveals the externality of Nigeria's political affairs and its electoral process, stressing the fact that none of the parties seems to deviate from the conventional route of dependency and global exclusivity. The Nigerian foreign policy would just be a continuation of the past, no radical departure from the Afrocentric nature of his external behaviors, including his strong belief in multilateralism through the United Nations and other regional organizations. And the meeting concludes by reiterating the fact that the line that divides both domestic and global affairs are becoming very blurred in Nigeria. Please permit me to appreciate the leadership of IPATC and IFK for supporting the successful host of this program. I also wish to appreciate my colleague, Dr. Oluwaseun Tella, and maybe you allow me to appreciate myself, as well as the IFK team for the successful webinar. I also wish to sincerely thank the entire panelists for the stimulating and robust engagement on the 2023 presidential election and the future of Nigerian democracy. Thanks to the panelists, Ms. Idayat Hassan, Professor Remi Ayede, Professor Kayode Ishuola, and Professor Ehosa Osagi. We hold you in high esteem, and we hope we can call you back for other events. Thank you so much, and bye.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.